Hey, good morning, guys. It's Jamie. Just doing a quick video. It is September 28th, I believe. It's Wednesday. I'm off today. I got a little bit of paperwork to do, but I want to talk a little bit this morning really quick about negative cash flow, negative equity. I'll try to keep it short. I'm drinking a 7-Eleven coffee this morning because it was convenient. Thus, convenience store. It's not the greatest, though. But, all right. So, what is negative cash flow? I could give you lots of examples, but I'm going to tell you what my interpretation is. I buy a property, single family, duplex, townhouse, multifamily, condominium plex, whatever it is, 10plex, 38plex, right? And after I pay all my expenses, taxes, insurance, principal and interest, whatever maintenance costs, whatever money I set aside, if I have a property manager, and let's say, just for argument's sake, the property cost me $5,000 a month. Okay, so $5,000 a month is my expense, all rolled in, all baked in, as they say, into that price of whatever it is, $100 a month, $1,000 a month, $5,000 a month, $50,000 a month. And so we're going to use $5,000 a month as an example. So in the $5,000, I have to make sure, at the very least, I would want to cover that $5,000 expense. Otherwise, it is a negative cash flow. I don't know if you call it an asset, right? It becomes a liability. If I'm spending, say, let's say I'm only collecting $4,500, and at the end of the day I net out an expense of $5,000, so I'm in the red, $500 a month. Now I may be in a position, or you may be in a position where you're like, I can sustain that for months or years if need be, and then you have to kind of work out the math and say, is it worth the negative cash flow over the course of whatever time frame that might be to justify holding that liability, or what you hope to be an asset. Now, some cases I could work out various scenarios of where if it's negative cash flow, $500, and you did it for 5 years, 500 times 12 months would be 6,000, right? Yeah, and then times 5 years, so 6,000 a year times 5 years is $30,000. So it cost me $30,000. All right. So let's say I have $100,000 set aside, and I'm meeting my expense of the $5,000 a month, except for $500. So I have to draw from my $100,000 every year, $6,000. All right. At the end of 5 years, I've diminished my $100,000. Forget if I was earning interest or anything. I'll just say the $100,000 was strictly allocated to cover these type of expenses. So for me to maintain this asset, let's say this coffee cup represents that property, okay? And at the end of 5 years, I am negative in my $100,000 balance, $30,000, I have $70,000 now, because to maintain that asset, liability, let's call it an asset, it cost me $30,000 to hold it, okay? Why would I do that? Well, maybe because the property went up in value. Let's say it was worth $1 million when I started, but it went up to $1.2 million at the end of 5 years. So I've gained $200,000 in equity in the valuation of the property. Now my income has stayed the same in this example, but the property has gone up, 1.2. I don't know what that percentage works out to be, but I guess 20%, right? So it's gone up. So I spent $30,000. Now I can either, refinance the property to take out money. I could sell the property, right? So depending what I owe, I could say, oh, I made $200,000 more. I mean, after everything, I'm gonna easily cover that $30,000. I made 200. I lost 30 to make 200. And after I net that out, I'm still going to be up, at the end of the day. And if I was able to pull a HELOC out of that property of, like, say 70%, and that gave me $30,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 that I was able to turn into more money, and then, that I could pull the money out that way. But I still have this monthly income problem. So I either have to sell the property or I have to raise the rents. Hopefully over that 5-year period in that example, I was able to do why am I not making the nut Do I need to cut some expenses? Do I need to raise the rents? Do I have tenants that aren't paying me enough money? Is there some problems that are keeping me back from getting the fair market value, the fair rent value for that area? I don't know, I have to make some adjustments. But at the end of the day, that is why I would probably negative cash flow for that 6 months, 1 year, 5 years, whatever the time frame is. But if I don't have the money to cover that $500, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to lose the asset, right? Because the bank, if there's a loan on it, or if I had financed it with somebody, is going to be like, hey, you're getting in debt with me. So they're either going to take the asset from me, and I'm going to lose it. So that application can go in any area, whether it's your own living expense, like where you live, whether it's a car, like if you're making a car payment and you're like, my car payment is $500 a month and I only make $300 a month, to cover that. Then eventually, after a couple months, the bank is going to, you're going to get hit on your credit, and you're going to get a late payment, and then, they'll take the car from you. So you don't, in that example, you can't negative cash flow, right? You got to know it. But if you had a property where, it's $5,000 a month, you're only making $45,000, you do the math and say, I think it's worth it because I have an end game. I have a strategy to that time frame. If you work at a job, and there's a movie that's called The Pursuit of Happiness with Will Smith, and it's based on a true story. I mean, obviously it's probably Hollywood, spiced it up a bit and embellished a little bit. But the fact is, I don't remember the guy's name. I think his name was Chris. I don't remember his last name. But the guy lived in the street. He was going through a hard time. He met a Wall Street guy. Chris was very smart. He got an internship. He had to work a whole year to have an opportunity to work for this firm, which paid, close to seven figures. It was like a, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year job. And this was, many years ago. So the end game was, if he could get that spot, which was a risk, because there was other people lobbying for that spot, and it wasn't guaranteed, but he had to work a whole year for free, right, for this company. Work a whole year, bust his tail for 1 year for nothing. Negative cash equity, right? Like negative cash flow, and basically, risk all that time, a year, and not even get the job. Now, granted, he would gain some skill sets he never had before. He got an education. So I look at it like, well, if I was going to go to school, I'd have to pay 10, 25, 50, 80,000, depending on the school, a year to get an education. And, that would give me the ability to go work somewhere. So, but the problem was, he was in a very rough spot. Like, he was homeless for most of that time, had to stay at homeless shelters. If you never see the movie, it's actually a good movie. So he struggled, negative cash flow, right? To eat, food and shelter, just to provide food and shelter for him and his son. He was a single dad. He got, I hate the spoiler alert, he did get the job. It did pay off, and it's a happy ending. But for him, the trade-off was negative cash flow for 1 year. Is it worth it? All right. And on and on. We could talk about a lot of different examples of what does that mean? Like, should I do that? If you get a property and the rates are high, my wife is really big on, like, what's the rate? What's the rate? But I look at it a little different. I'm like, well, what's the cash flow, right? And I'm not throwing that word around because a lot of people use that, but I look at cash flow like, if I could make $500, right, regardless of what the rate is, regardless of all the details. If I'm like, at the end of the day, I'm going to own this property and I'm going to be able to keep it because it's covering its expense, regardless if it's 3% or 12%. It's still negative. It is positive cash flow, or at least covers itself, and it's going to appreciate, and the debt's going to go down. I think I could refinance it later. I could sell it later. And it's not costing me anything because it's $500 more than I had when I started. Okay. So depending on if I had to put, how much money I had to put down or anything like that. So I look at things a little bit different, and I'm not saying that it's the right way, not financial advice. But if you're my son, or my kids, I'm just trying to give you some input to consider in that process. Negative equity is like if you owe more than the thing is worth. Okay, so if you have a car and the car is worth 20,000 and you owe 25, you're in a negative equity position. Not a good position to be in. So the only way you're going to make that up is maybe if it's generating some money, you're renting it out, or someone's willing to pay you. And this can go in stocks and options if you own companies. This happens to me a lot, where I'll buy into a company and it negative cash flows, or I have negative equity, meaning like the stocks that I own are not worth, not generating any money for me. So if I put 10 grand into a stock, like right now I have 100 shares of Adobe. I own them at, let's say, $290 a share. It's at $270 a share. So I'm down $2,000. So if I cash it in today, I have negative equity of $2,000 for what I paid to what it's worth, right? There's a deficit, a delta, a difference between those two numbers. Now I want them to come together. In fact, I want to be the opposite. I want to be 300 to 310. The current evaluation, the low end is 310, I believe, by 35 analysts. The mid-range is like 360 to 380, and then high end is crazy, like $500-600. So I'm like, man, I just need to get there. But I can I'm not negative cash flowing on that because it's just parked money, but it's not earning me any money. I believe they have dividends, and I want to say it's $10 a share. I could be wrong, but don't quote me on that. But at the end, I want to make money in a shorter term unless I'm holding the company for the next 10 years. So in 100 shares of Adobe, as an example, today, if it's 270 and I own it for 290, the only way I'm going to generate money to cover that difference is if I sell you a covered call, meaning I own 100 shares, I got $28,000 tied up in that 100 shares, or more than that, right? $29,000. I'm negative $2,000. How do I make that up? Well, if I sell you a covered call and you're willing to pay me a premium each week, and the premium is $200, I have to do that 10 times if that stock price never changed to make up the $2,000. If at the end of that cycle of 10 weeks, and I was making $200 a week, I'd have to then, if I sold it at the end of the 10 weeks and the price never changed, it was 270, and I paid 290, I'd have to cover it by collecting premium, whether it's 100 or 300, if I average $200. I've done that before. But that's another different situation where like I'm trying to am I holding the stock? Am I holding the company? Do I need the money? Do I need to access that money for other things? So it's a lot to consider, but I mean, that's something I just heard about the other day, and I was like, I really identified with that statement because I see it every day at my job where people are in negative equity. I see it every day at my job when people do credit applications for financing or leasing a vehicle, whether it's a $20,000 vehicle or a $100,000, $200,000 vehicle. They sometimes the banks will say, oh, they make a lot of money, but their debt is higher than the income, right? So they're negative cash flow to their checks and balances. So these are things that I didn't learn when I was younger. These are not things that were taught to me that I think are vitally important for a young person in their teens or 20s to understand, because a lot of people get in over their head or they buy things impulsively, whether they sign up for a membership, whether they purchase a vehicle, whether they buy a house or a property, whether they buy just things they don't need, some type of like a clothing or a watch, I don't know, something. It's just something that like I could have probably held off on that. So that's my thought of the day. I don't know what you guys think, but I hope you guys have a great Wednesday, and I will talk to you next time. See ya.